Hi everyone, Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And this is our last week of December for The Wraith King by Juliette Cross.
I know it's sad to be finishing up, but there is a novella. So
Yes, there is. And there's
if you're
also
not
like a
ready,
short story on her website that you can read for free. I notated, like, I wrote down whenever we see those characters that are in those things, I was like, here is where to say that. So we'll remind you later. But basically we pick back up where at the end of last time, Una was pretty sure she knew where they had to go for the next mission, and she knew that Gaul was going to be pissed. And sure enough, he is in
yeah, we
fact
start
not
off with
thrilled.
him. I don't like this. I hate it.
Yes, so they have to go into the Beast Fae territory. All of his men are also not thrilled. They do not like dealing with those guys. And
I
she's
thought
actually
that they were like a united, she was kind
right.
of like, I thought you guys were all one, and
Yes,
it's like,
she's very confused by
oh,
this. I guess the light fae thought it was like all the dark fae against them, and like that's not really actually true at all. Um, and so he's like, well, we have to bring a tribute to the Beast Lord. Like that's like how you got to roll if you roll in there
just
and talk to
hilarious when
him.
he's the king. Like supposedly, I can see
Right.
why Una's confused because she's like, wait, you're the head
Right.
honcho. Where are you
They're
bringing a
gonna tell
tribute?
you you can't come in? Like what?
Well, and also they were like, she's not going to be allowed to just walk around
Right.
on her own,
Um,
looking through their things, trying to find some stuff. Like,
right, exactly. Nobody's gonna like that. And then she admits she already knows where the third text is as well, which is at Sulkin's heart, which is in the Shadow Fate lands. So basically they have to go all over and the boys are mad.
everywhere terrible. That's
Yes.
where they're going.
So she tells them the story of getting one of the prophecies directly from a wood fae named Murga. And that's the one you can read about it's called Kings and Bones. It's a novella that's available now. It was in an anthology earlier and now it's on its own. Um, and so, of course, all of these are like riddles, which pisses off the men. They're like, why can't they just say what they mean? Like, this is trash.
Irritated with the gods for not just
Yes.
saying what they mean, which is really funny to me.
It is very funny. And so the men all disperse, and Dahlia comes in, and he says they need her to travel with them, but he doesn't really tell her why. And he's not going to tell the cold either. Like it's sort of a need to know. Like the guys that were in that room are the only ones who really know like why they're doing this, and he wants to keep it that way. Um, and so they're Gall and Una are like very flirty in his war room, and he like jokingly offers to like be her lady's maid, and she's like, I mean, I wouldn't hate that. He's like, let's go have your bath right now. And she's like, we haven't even had dinner, and he's like, don't care.
No worries. No longer hungry. Yeah,
It's very cute.
they're so
Um,
sweet. Like once they get on the same page, they're so cute
yes,
together.
it's so cute. Um, And so, on the trek the next day, Gull is kind of admiring how Una is like making friends with his men on the journey. Um, and he like likes that she's like starting to feel like she fits in, which is what he wanted. And so they cross into the Beast Fae territory, and pretty much as soon as they do, like they know that they're there because they have scouts out and about all the time. And so they're waiting for them, including Bezaleel, who is their like warrior chief. And you can read his story. That's the one that's on her website. It's like just a little morsel, but it's fun. So, it's called the Beast Phase Bargain. So they say they want to talk to Lord Redvyr, who's like the head of the beasts, and they agree that Gaul and Una and six of his men can come, and the rest have to wait there. And so they do. Um, And Redveer is very intrigued by Una. He's like looking all over her and her black wings and like being very flirty.
He's not a fan of this
No, Gaul
situation.
hates it. He hates when anybody gives her attention, honestly, but he really doesn't like this. Um, and he looks at Gaul and he's like, seems you've been busy. And Gaul's kind of like, don't.
King.
And so, of course, that's when we clock that, pretty sure she's pregnant. And Gaul isn't sure if she knows yet, but he noticed before they left. And obviously, the Beast Fae has noticed.
Sniffed it
Um,
out.
Yeah, and calls him out, and he's like, "Mm, shh." And so, they tell him what they want, and Redveer knows what they're talking about, and he tells Valen, his like, or no, not Valen, that's the other one. He tells his like warrior guy to take them to Grindolvek, and so they go. Grindolvek is a beast fae, but he was born over 1,000 years ago, which is like unheard of for beast fae to live that long.
Yeah.
But a naiad heard his mom's distress when she was in labor and came to help birth him, and some of her blood got mixed in with his, and so he's a little bit different, and he's green, where all the rest of them are
Not
like
green.
gray and brown and black, and like he's green.
I
Um,
read it when I originally read this. It was before Wicked, but like now that Wicked's
oh
out,
right.
I've been like, anyway.
So they walk into his lair and they call his name, and he comes out and he says, "You're the one," to her, and she's like, "I guess I am." And so the words are in his blood. They were given to him at birth by Elska, the wood goddess, and she has to drink them. And Gaul is like, "Oh hell no!" And and Grindolvek's like, "I mean, yes, like if you want them, that's
The
how
only
they gotta
way.
come."
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, Gaul starts yelling her name, and she realizes that she's been hidden from him and kind of like floated over to where Grindolvek is. And so she's like, "Okay, I guess I gotta just like do this quickly." So she drinks his blood and she receives the words, and she has, of course, pain and another vision, and then she passes out. It's just like last time, except for this time she's out for like a day and a half,
Yeah.
and Gaul is trying not to
Beside
fully freak
himself.
out. Especially because Dahlia says like she's fine, she's just exhausted, like she needs to rest or whatever, and he's like not so sure. And of course Dahlia has also clocked that she's pregnant because she was, doing her healing thing on her. But he said he doesn't know if she knows and hasn't told him, or if she like hasn't figured it out yet. And so he's just kind of waiting and seeing on that. And so she finally wakes up and he's like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "I feel amazing." Like this is great, right? And so they like snuggle up and they're talking about that myth from the beginning of Noct and Zara and Lumera. And of course her version is like totally different from his.
I mean, like
Lumera is not to blame.
in her version of all the stories, it's
Yeah,
like they're like whatever the dark fae deities are
right.
like terrible,
Right.
and they
Lumera is
definitely were the
perfect.
ones.
Of course she
Yeah,
didn't do anything wrong. Like, and of
she
course
had
she makes
no
a point.
idea.
She makes a point. It's like, oh, of course the man couldn't be the one responsible for, sleeping with two women and betraying both of them. Like it has to be one of the women's fault. Um, but yeah, so they talk about all that. And then they're just like enjoying each other, like just laying there, like relaxing for 1 minute. They feel like they haven't gotten to relax like since all this started, basically.
Yeah. And Gull, I
Um,
mean, I feel like Gull has been very, and probably because before he found out, like before they got together, he was dressed.
right.
Then they get together and it's like, phew, but now she's like, we need to go do dangerous things.
Yeah.
Also, he's like, but you're pregnant. Like
But let's
everything
don't.
is
Yeah.
always like more stressful than the last. So
Yes.
it's nice for them to get a moment to just
Well, and
hang
he's trying
out.
to get her to rest, and she's like, "I don't need to rest. I feel great." So she gets on top of him, and she's like undressing him as he's like telling her the rest of the like story.
Story, yeah.
And then they're having sex. It's actually super hot and also like really like sweet. Um, and afterwards she's realizing that their customs with like the concubines and all that stuff don't seem to actually come from Vix. She's like, it's probably some horny greeny king in your past who decided he was sick of his lady and wanted another one. Like she's
Yeah.
like, clearly it wasn't this way like from the beginning. um and so that's an interesting thing for them to kind of figure out, I guess.
It was interesting for me too because it's like I don't think that Gaul ever had that impression of
Mm-mm.
like what was supposed to happen or what the Mizra meant.
Yeah,
So I think it's still like she has this opinion that like, oh, this is common.
right,
But really, like Gaul's father, what he did to his wife was not like seen as normal or
right.
good.
Yeah,
Um, but obviously she's gotten her story from a different historian. So
right.
she's very like, oh well, I guess all these,
Yeah, maybe this isn't really like how it's supposed to be after all.
which is
Um,
good for her to finally start to realize after all the times that
yeah,
she was thinking her role was
not important,
just,
basically.
yeah.
Like, yeah, or not important to him. Like it felt important to her, but not to him, she thought. So later they go out for food, but as they're approaching, everybody kind of stops because they hear something, and it's meer-wolves attacking their camp, which that should not be a thing. Like they don't do that historically. Like there something's wrong with them, and Una can actually smell that something is like
Sick.
wrong with
Yeah.
them. They're sick, and so there's fighting. Una ends up with Farron like facing off against one of them. He's trying to protect her, and then she ends up flying up in the air with her wings that now work to protect herself, and he gets injured.
Her wings worked the first time, like not the first time that she drank
Right,
words
the
and did
words.
but she only like floated up a bit and she got tired very quickly.
Right.
So I don't think anyone was really sure what, if she could use that power to protect herself or to
Yeah.
fly anywhere really. And so for her to be able to like shoot up into the sky and like stay up there
Very useful,
was very
obviously.
nice.
Yeah. Especially it's like if you can't fight, at least you can get away. And so the Beast Fae have showed up at this point to help. And they say that these aren't the first signs of like madness that they have seen lately. They have their own affliction, it seems, like Una's people. It's just a different kind. So they are also really like struggling in the same way that hers have with these people just randomly like getting these illnesses.
Yeah.
So Una and Hava go to visit Farron to check on him after they've done the funeral pyres for the people who died in the fight, and one of them was actually Pulo, who's like his head of guard guy. It's one of his best friends, Tirzel, is one of the guys who died, so that was really sad. Um, and so they're going to see Farron, and as they approach the tent, they hear Mech and Dahlia arguing. And Una thinks it's about Farron's recovery. Like Dahlia hasn't been able to like heal him properly or something. Um,
Fast enough. Like they think that he's super worried and that he's
right,
just taking it out on her because she's the one who's
right,
there and
exactly.
able to
And
do something.
when she goes in there, she sees that he seems fine. Like he seems healed. So she's not sure like what they were
Just
arguing
happened to
about.
him.
Um, and so as they're sitting there talking, Theron, he's like kind of drunk from the healing magic. That's like a side effect, I guess, after somebody heals you. And he like puts his hand on top of her hands, which seems like a little bit familiar. And she's like, no, don't love that. And so she kind of like pulls her hand out. And he says, thank you, my Mizra. I knew you'd come to me. And she's like, hey, this is weird. Like he's
I'm
never talked to me like
so.
that before.
And
Yeah,
the thing is that people have been calling her Misra as like a title,
right.
but he's saying it
Like
not like it's
my.
different. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's like,
And it's
don't like
very
that.
like intimate. Like yeah,
Yeah.
he's being real weird.
And she
And
kind of chalks it up to his like whatever's going on with his like
like he's
post magic brain.
delirious.
But meanwhile, Mech is trying to like herd them out of there. Like he's like, okay, he needs to rest. Like, see ya, as respectfully as he can. And so she and Hava leave. Um, but the whole thing seemed really strange. And so she tells Goll about it that night. Uh, and he says Mech has always been very protective of his twin. Um, they didn't have a father, and so, it's just he's like, I'm sure that's all it is. He's like, overly protective, whatever. And she's like, okay. So, the next day they're gonna take Drac, because he wants to show her something before they go into the Shadowfey lands to get the third text. So Drac flies them to Windalek Castle, which is where Gaul grew up with his mom before he had to
Yes.
go like become the heir, whatever.
When they were first like negotiating their union, I guess, and she
Hmm.
asked if she would have to like what would happen after she had their heir.
Hmm.
One of the options that she had was to go to this castle
Right,
and be by herself there.
right.
So now that we see what the castle is, it does give you a different impression of what he was offering her
Yes.
because she was kind of like, oh, I can be banished here, I can go
Right.
back to Lemuria and be banished there. But
Yeah.
actually, this place has sentimental value to him. It's not
Big time.
just
And she
he's
says, "Whose is it?" And he says, "It's yours, actually." And she's like, "What does that
what?
mean?" And so he tells her about his mom and how happy they were there when he was growing up. And then about his mom's death and how he was like commanded to never speak of her again, which was, of course, really difficult for a kid. Um, and then he gives Una his mom's handkerchief that he's kept all these years. Uh, and he had always known he would give the castle like to his Mizra. Like that was always the
This
plan.
plan, yeah,
Um, and so he's giving it to her. And he talks about like bringing up a kid there, and she realizes she's like, "Oh, I'm pregnant." She's like, "Did you already know that?" And he's like, "Yeah, did you?" And she's like, "Well, no, I suspected, but like it
I
hasn't been
wasn't
that
sure.
long, so I wasn't sure." Um, and she's like, "I would love to come here, but I only want to come here with you. Like I don't ever want to come here on my own."
So
And so then they like go on a tour and have a little picnic. And then they go to meet Lord Valen, who's the high priest of Gadlazel. He is the guy who's like second to the prince in the Shadow Fae world. And so he takes
definitely a
them.
fancy person when you meet him.
Yes.
It's
Well,
like,
yeah, and he's
oh,
got like gold and stuff, and she's like, "Oh, are you a royal?" And he's like, "No," but
yeah.
their priests are like warrior priests, and they do like dress their horns in gold and stuff, similar to like royalty. So he takes them to Solskin's heart, which is like a giant boulder, basically, and the words are like etched into it. And so she's like, how the heck am I supposed to deal with this? Like, I can't just swallow it like I did the others. And so some of the guys start talking and they think that Prince Torvin could help them. But Valen is like, I don't know why he would. Like, this is not our problem, basically. But then all of a sudden they hear something and this dryad like comes up out of the rock and is like, actually, it is your problem. It's everybody's problem. Like, go get him now. And Valen is kind of like, okay. So he does. Um, and so they tell her that did they tell Una that the prince has power that they think can remove the like carvings and like give them to her basically. So, but they have to wait for him to show up. So they make camp. And Una and Hava want to wash in the river, which he doesn't love, especially because it's like basically in the middle of camp. And she's like, "Well, I'm not gonna get naked or whatever. Like I have my, she has like her chemise on or whatever."
It's like, I need a shower. It's like going
Right.
camping with boys. They're
Right.
never that interested in being clean, and you're like,
Yeah. She's like,
guys,
I know you can
I'm
go a whole week
sticky.
without bathing, but like not I. And so uh he's gonna scry with Dahlia because he wants to know more about this vision. He's started to feel the walls closing in as far as like the whatever darkness is coming for them, but he still doesn't know what it is or
What
where it's
is
coming
happening?
from.
Yeah.
Um, so she and Hava go and they're talking. Mech and Farron have like escorted them and they're just kind of like waiting up on the ridge or whatever. And so they're talking in the water, and Una teases Hava about liking Keffa. And Hava's like, "Oh no, I'm he thinks I'm a kid." And she's like, "Well, you're
Never.
not a kid, are you?" And she's like, "No." So she thinks she's talked her into like admitting her crush on him.
He
Um,
does have a really good voice.
yes,
Anyway.
it's very cute. She's like, "Oh, his voice is so beautiful." And it's so sweet. And so then they hear something in the water and they're kind of backing up like toward the shore, looking around. And Una's worst nightmare happens. Some whites, which are like the dead skeletal soldiers that
They're like zombie soldiers that, and they're the ones that were
in the
in the
dungeon.
dungeon that would have eaten her if Gull
Yes, and
hadn't.
she hoped to never see them again, and yet here they are.
I mean, I've never seen them, and I hope never to see that.
Right? No
That's
kidding.
creepy, creepy AF.
So at this point, Mech and Farron have run down, like when the girls started yelling. And as the whites come into view, Mech turns to Farron and says, "How could you? I won't let you." And Farron says, "You knew it would come to this." And he
Like, what?
and he's like,
What?
"It's madness, Farron." And they start fighting each other. She goes to run away, but Farron grabs her and he knocks her out with his sword. It's bad news
It's
bears for
so
everybody.
bad.
Yeah.
And
So
then, of course, Gull's not there. She's knocked out. We're in the dark. And
yes, and then we switch back to Goll, and they can't find Dahlia. She never showed up for the scrying session, and Pulo was like, "We can't find her." So they go out to start searching, and then they hear the whites coming into the camp. And he sees
yeah.
them, and his mind, he's like, "None of my people have that power that my dad had." And then he's like, "Oh shit, that I know of." Like this is what Dahlia was talking about. Somebody's been keeping secrets and they're very dangerous ones. And so the whites are coming, they start fighting them, and he realizes they're coming from the direction of the stream, and he's like, "Oh God." And so he runs. He's burning them up as he's going, like with his power. And
Comes in handy sometimes for
yeah,
sure.
for sure. And so they find Hava passed out, like near the stream, but she's alive. And then they find Mech, who is dying. And he says, "I'm sorry, my king. I should have told you. I tried to stop him." And then he's basically like, Farron is sick in his head, like something's wrong with him. Dahlia tried to heal him, but like it didn't work. And he took Una. And then Goll is like, trying to give him peace in his last breath. And he's like, "It's okay, like rest easy, cousin." And Mech is like, "Not cousin, brother." And then he dies. And Goll is like,
What is that? I also was like this. What
yeah, exactly.
is
So he
happening?
realizes that Mech and Farron are his half brothers from dear old dad.
So
And he's
yeah,
like,
we had been like they have no father, but they had a real bad father. That was
yeah, they
that
did.
was the
Real bad.
problem, actually.
Yeah, real bad. And so in his mind, he's like, I wonder if he like seduced her or coerced her or forced her, his aunt, like who knows?
Any
But
of those
like
options could
any of
have
them are
been.
terrible. Yeah. And so he realizes how Dahlia's vision makes sense now, like of what happened. And so Gaul heads off on Drac to go and search for her. Una, we're back
Yeah.
with her now, and she wakes up hurting, and she can smell the like badness coming off of Farron. And it's just like those wolves that attack their camp. Like she knows that something's wrong. And so they're going into like a cave, and Dahlia is there too. And Farron has some pretty dastardly plans, which include making her take this poison to like kill her fetus. Because he wants to plant his own in there because he thinks he's the rightful king and he's clearly very insane. Um, so he talks about Gaul
No,
as his
thank you.
brother.
Like we're not doing
Right. No. He talks about Gaul as his brother, which of course is Una is like shook. She never obviously knew anything about that. Dahlia is like crying and begging him not to do this. He tells her, he's like, "Oh, I'll still keep you. Like, I know you love me. You'll be my, top concubine next to my Mizra. Like, no worries, basically." It's like so gross. And Dahlia is like, and
so
Una is
it
like, I can see that she does in fact love him. Like that's what's happening here. It's not good. Um, but Dahlia is crying and like she's like, "I'll do anything but not that. Like I'm not gonna do that." And he hits her.
she's already like sacrificed her own like she's supposed to be like celibate and not
Yeah.
marry and like the whole because of her position as Oracle,
Yes.
she's not supposed to be having this kind of relationship at all. So she's not gonna then be second to some other person. Like
Right. No. Like
that was
she
not the
already
plan.
risked everything for him. Yeah. So it's real bad. So he hits her. Una is like horrified. And so Una tells him, she's like, "Something's wrong with you. Like, I can feel the darkness. I can see it in your eyes. Like, something's bad wrong." And he's like, "No, the darkness freed me and showed me the truth." So he's like fully embraced the crazy, right?
He's
Um,
into it. He
yeah,
does. I will. I just want to pause before we get too much further. But he is also like fixated. I guess he says that she's marked by Gosriel. So it's like basically it doesn't matter who else or like if he loves somebody or whatever. Like
right.
this Una is
She's the one it has to
special,
be.
and so
Yeah,
he's got to have her.
yeah.
And so like at that point, I was like, oh, there's like no reasoning with this
Oh
man.
no,
But
he's
then when
full
he
crazy.
kept, and the more he talks, the more you're like, oh, okay, no, mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
Like it's gross, but also there's no way to fix this.
No, it's terrible. And so Dahlia, after getting up from getting slapped down, moves to like do his bidding, and she just looks at Una and she's like, "I'm sorry." And Una is trying not to panic and she's thinking of Drac. And so she connects to his mind, but she's like, "What am I going to show him? Like, I'm inside of a cave. That's not useful, right?" So she's trying to figure out what she's going to do. And meanwhile, Farron is like forcing her to lay down. They want to give her this poison. He like kisses her. She's like resisting. And then a squeak like gets her attention from the ceiling of the cave, and it's bats. And she's like, "Oh, I can do this, right?" So she disconnects from Drac, which she can like hear the howl of Goll like in her because Goll is connected to Drac too. So in a way, they were sort of connected through him. And when she
Yeah.
disconnects, he's very mad, obviously, but she connects to the bats who are kind of like a hive mind situation. So she has to like envelop them all at once. She keeps trying to do like one and it's not working. And she's like, oh God, what's wrong? And then she
Like,
realizes.
no, we're getting all of them.
And so she like orders them to come down. And so they attack Dahlia and Farron, and she runs outside. But she needs her hands untied. So then she calls the bats back to her to like peck away at
Like,
her
not on
ropes,
that.
which they do. And she can see Farron coming after her, and Dahlia like hits him from behind with a rock, and he turns around to attack Dahlia, and she sends the bats like back toward him again, and she just jumps off the cliff and like flies away. And she's not sure where to go. She's not even sure where she is, but she starts to see some things and then she sees the castle and she's like, "Oh, I'm at the castle." So she tries to reconnect to Drac to like tell him where she's going. But she gets distracted and she kind of like starts to fall in the woods and she's like falls pretty rough like through the trees and like lands on the ground outside of the gates of the castle. And she can hear
Will
the white.
say one thing here with Juliette Cross is not completely like she's not opposed to hurting her own characters and doing because I was like, oh no, shield, but then she kept falling and I was like, oh ow, oh no,
Yeah,
she's
and it seems
maybe
like
she's
she
not gonna
like
be
cracked
okay.
something in her wrist like when she caught herself on the ground, so she's
Yeah.
hurt. And another dryad kind of comes out of the bushes and is like, they're coming, hurry. And she can hear the whites like coming through the forest. And so she runs and she forces herself to fly up again over the gate of the castle. And she
She's kind of hobbled. Like she's injured enough that
yeah,
she's not in like when she first flew away, you had the thought like, oh, well, she can get away. It's
right.
fine. But then it was like, oh no,
Now
no,
she's
it's not.
exhausted and she's in rough shape. And she can see Farron on his horse, like in the back of the like white horde, and she's like, oh God.
She's coming.
And so she runs into the stables to hide. Eventually, Farron comes in and he's got like a white mere-wolf. So like a dead, rotting mere-wolf, like at his side, who's like searching for her. And she's trying not to freak out and like stay quiet. She's like, she knows that Goll is almost there. Like she can feel them. And he is rageful, which is just like pouring through this connection that she has with Drac. And she knows that Farron's a dead man if he can get here, but she has to stay alive in the meantime. She tries to run out the back of the stable, but he grabs her. And then we're back with Goll, and he is, of course, furious. And he also, as they get closer to the castle, he's feeling himself like filled with the power of the gods. Like he can feel like they're surrounding him, they're helping him, like he's on the right side of this, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and
And
so
it is kind of reminiscent a little bit of the prologue
yes,
where, he was like, he just felt a strength that was like beyond what he had felt before.
yeah,
And this, it's not, I mean, it doesn't say that it's the same thing, but it feels very similar to
right.
that, where he's like, okay, well, we're coming. And
He's like, it's
it's,
happening now. I have the power to do this that maybe I wouldn't have yesterday.
mhm.
And so when he lands and he walks in, Farron is holding Una in front of him, and they're like in a standoff in the courtyard. And he's, you know, trying to talk shit. And Goll says to him, Farron, nothing is going to happen here that doesn't end with your dead body in my hands. It's best if you accept that. And I'm like, all right, tell him. So Farron says, you know, basically is sort of reminiscing about his mom. Like they assumed Gaul was dead or close to it in the dungeon, and that, they wouldn't have to worry about him. And it was his mom's dying wish that he be the one to kill his dad and take the throne. And then as he was making plans to do that, Gaul like beat him to
Just
the punch,
showed up,
basically.
with a sword,
Yeah.
cut his head off.
And so he's big mad, and also crazy, which is not a good combination. So he yells at the wolf and the wolf jumps at Goll and Goll just like destroys it with his fire magic. And also Una is noticing that it's like more magic than he usually has. Like she can feel the gods there too. And so Farron starts kind of like backing up while still holding her. And Goll's fire creeps over and wraps around Farron's wrists. And you know that he can make it where it's not hot because he gave her that like fire cloak earlier in the story. And so he's making sure to not burn her when he's like ripping Farron's hands away from her neck. And so she drops down to the ground and Goll,
Very like, you will not be touching
yes,
my wife.
no, not at all. And he says, yeah, so Farron says to him, I'm your brother. And Goll says, you were, but then you touched my wife, and dared to hurt her. Now you're nothing. You are ash in the ether. I was like, oh, burn. Tell him he ain't shit. And so Una does not hate hearing him call her my wife. She's super into that, even in the midst of all of this that's happening. Um, and so Farron, of course, again, is like, she's just a concubine. Like, why are you taking her side? Basically, is what it sounds like he's saying. And Gaul is like, no, she's my queen. She's everything. And then
The
Gaul,
thing to me at this point in the book
yeah,
is very interesting to me because it felt to me like his people, like his inner circle at least,
yeah,
understood that because when she was like, I'm just a concubine, there were people who were like,
no,
what?
no,
I
ma'am. Yeah,
don't think you know what Mizra mean.
yeah,
And but yet he is treating it like it's as if he like sucked up all the dad's toxicity and was
yes,
like, "Yep, that's the
absolutely.
way I want to go."
Yeah.
Because it's not
Which
as
is funny
if
because he
like
also wanted to kill the dad. Like, you wouldn't think that that would have, but yeah, that's exactly what happened.
yeah, but it feels like the other people weren't confused about her position,
No, not at all.
but he
Including the other brother, Mech. He was the one
yeah.
at one point who was like, "No, I don't think that means what you think it means,"
Yeah.
basically. When they're talking in the garden. And so Gaul's like, "You should look away," and she's like, "No." And so he starts stabbing Farron to death and then some, basically. Eventually she does look away because it's gross. And so Gaul comes over and like lays his cloak on her and he is like holding her and he's just apologizing and she's like, "No, it's okay. I'm okay." Like this was inevitable basically. Like we knew this was coming, you know. And so he puts her on Drac and they're flying away and she's holding Gaul's hand and she sees their moon binding from when they got married. The marks are like intertwining like they did that first night and they're like really bright and she's like really excited about that.
Yeah.
And that's when they finally confess their love for each other because they've both, especially him, have said everything but that basically, like implying how important she is to him, and then they
Yeah.
finally say the words. And
Feel
it's
like I was clear that they were in love with each
right,
other.
yes, very
So,
clear.
but they finally and you know that with Una, like she was clear that how she felt,
Yeah,
but there was still like surprise when he took her to the castle and it was his mom's and
yeah,
that like that she was still always surprised when he showed affection, and I feel like
yeah,
he also had like this little worry of like, oh, she might want to run away from like,
yeah.
so it's really interesting to see, um because I feel like it's one of those things where like everyone around them was probably like,
Duh.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Totally.
they're over here like, really, you love
Really,
me?
you love
Oh
me? Yeah. So, 3 days later, they meet Prince Torvin in the Shadowfey realm. They did find Dahlia dead in that cave. Farron had strangled her, and Una kind of explained to Gaul the darkness that was in Farron and how, like what happened basically. And he decided that he had to just let it all go. Like he couldn't fester on that and still deal with all the stuff they still needed to deal with, which is a lot.
yeah.
Um,
Although,
and
like, the truth is that they wouldn't, like, up until this point, there doesn't seem to be a cure for this, like, madness that's going on.
mhm,
And it's also not entirely, like, clear, when how much of that was what was happening to Farron, or if Farron had
Right.
like
Delusions of grandeur before that, and that just made it worse. Yeah.
it feels like he did,
Yeah.
but you still, it's still
Yeah.
kind of up in the air. So the questions are there. I am a person who like has a hard time if there's questions, like just
Moving
continue,
on,
being like,
letting
oh, it's
go.
fine. I did what I had to do. So
Yeah.
I fully was like, I get why he's like, oh, could it have been different?
Yeah.
But the truth is at this, like right now, no.
Yeah. No. So Prince Torvin agrees to help them, for a future boon from Goll and Una, and also he wants to know how Goll broke his dad's wards that night in the dungeon and like saved them, basically. And he kind of explains that Una had been there, though he didn't know it at the time, and he felt, I guess, power from that, and also from just like the buildup of like what was about to happen, and he just felt like that night he was more powerful and he was able to break the wards. And so the prince is like, so basically the gods just changed their mind and backed you. Like that was how you
The
did it,
gods just like you,
Like,
you're just their favorite. Great.
yeah. And then he says, hopeless. And everybody's like, what does that mean? And so clearly something he wanted to know
Something's up.
that because there's something he needs to do or needs to know how to do. And now he's afraid that if the answer is the gods decided to back you, then he can't do anything about that,
Yeah.
basically.
I mean,
Um,
also he could look for his like one true love. Maybe that would help.
right. Maybe he'll do that in the next book. I hope so.
Hurt.
Um, so the prince does his thing and gives the words to that same dryad who wakes up again from the rock. And Una asks the dryad, I saved the quote because it was really good, and it made me cry at the end of this book. But she
Well,
says, "Why me?" She says to the dryad. It could have been anyone. And the dryad says, "Yes, it could have been anyone, but one night a brave young girl flew away from her home with only goodness in her heart to cure her people from a foul sickness. Her courage and goodness were repaid with pain and torture and the theft of her God-given gifts, a tragedy, a blasphemy against the gods." And so Una is like bawling crying now as she's hearing this story. And so continued the dryad, the female born into the light was remade in the darkness, the dark fey lady. You are deserving of her healing gift and far more than that. And so Una realizes she's going to be getting her healing gifts back and she's very happy.
yeah, yeah.
And so she takes the words from the dryad and new runes show up on her wrist again. And Goll looks at them and he's like, they mean like mother of all fae, basically, but like the way they're inflected like means queen, pretty
Yeah.
much, as far as he can tell. And so he turns around to his guys and he's like basically reintroduces her as not only Mizra, but also his wife and Queen Una.
Yeah.
And they're thrilled. Everybody's like, chanting her name. And he's like, the gods have declared it so, and now I affirm it. Like she's my queen. And so first thing they do is go to her brother to heal him. Um, they get there, she learns that her dad has already died. The same emissary who came to check on her, like sent word back, but of course they haven't been at home,
Right
so
home.
they didn't
Yeah.
know. And so she goes and she heals her brother. And at first he's like, "Oh, you've come to say goodbye," and he like thanks Gaul for letting her come. And Gaul's like, "She's the queen; she can do whatever she wants." And her brother's like, "The what now?" And then he's like, "Oh, I guess this isn't a dream because only my sister could go somewhere as a
Slave and come back
and come back
being
as
the
the
queen.
queen." Yeah. And so it's very funny. And so she heals her brother and they have a nice little visit afterward. And she asks about like how her dad was at the end. And he tells her that he had told their dad that she was happily married away and, she couldn't be there, but she loved him. And he's like, I lied to him
Like, so the
basically. And
truth
she's like,
then.
actually, you didn't lie. Like, that's exactly what's happened. I am very happy. And so, of course, he's happy to hear that. And then she visits her father's like tomb and she goes through all those emotions and then she's like, I'm ready to go home to Noctamere. And he is like so happy that she thinks of his place
It's
as her
home.
home
Yeah.
now. Yeah. So now we're in the epilogue and they have a baby boy, Malchus. He's 2 months old and they're at Windolek Castle. Um they've hired like a group of people to run it, and it's like dark fae and light fae together, kind of like as an example of how they can all like live and work and be happy together, basically. Um, and he's just thrilled she ever wanted to come back there at all after everything that happened there. And she was like, "No, I know how important it was to you and your mom, and like I wasn't gonna let that be the last memory I had of this place." And it's very like emotional. And so they're out. They talk about how they had sent healing orbs full of her magic out to like all the towns in her country to like heal all the people who had the disease. And because she obviously can't go door to door like doing it herself, that's not really feasible. And so they're like out on the balcony, kind of looking out and talking, and they see a little blue wood sprite approaching, and she like messes with Drac first, like out in the field, and then she comes like toward them, and she is Gwendazel, and Lord Valen has sent her from the Shadow Fae to ask if he can visit. But by the way, he has a hostage, and he needs it kept secret from the prince. And they're like, hmm. So they agree, and then it starts thundering, and Gull's like, "Okay, hopefully that's not a portent of, what's to come, some more storms." And that is the end.
Just think that only the best people, good people always call before they come, right? Even in emergency.
Right.
I'm like, what just happened?
Well, and they're like, "Why didn't he just come to the gate and like announce himself?" And she's like, "Well, he has a hostage and he wants it to be a secret." And they're
Gonna
like,
bring extra guests without asking first.
"So, and you can read Valen's story in Kings and Bones, and hopefully the prince will be next. I guess we'll find out when we talk to Juliette next week. So we hope you
Yeah.
guys love this. We had so much fun.
It is a really fun book, and we are talking more about it on our Instagram in the on main on in the
Yes.
posts. But if you missed any of our recaps, they're all right here on YouTube. So
Yes.
scroll back.
And we will see you guys next week when we talk to Juliette Cross.
See you then.